There we go. Okay, I see it says live now. Thanks for the thumbs up, John. Hi, everybody, and to those attending. This is our second flood insurance webinar presented. I'm John Van Winkle. I am engineering manager with the City of Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility. Again, welcome to the Tucson Area Flood Insurance webinar. We've got several jurisdictions here with us today doing a joint presentation showing what state and local agencies are doing to manage flood risk, make communities more resistant and resilient to floodplain and erosion disasters, and also to encourage everybody to research flood insurance for their property. We'll be providing a lot of good information today. City of Tucson's goal, and as with the other jurisdictions presenting today, is to reduce flood and erosion hazards, the damage associated with them, and the associated costs. So we hope you gain some information from the presentations today. We'll be going over a lot of good stuff. So with the other jurisdictions here today, we'll be discussing a wide range of topics, including floodplain, erosion hazard risks, floodplain mapping, things people can do on an individual basis or on a property basis to reduce risk, how flood zones are mapped and determined, and then providing lots of good contact information and resources for people to go and further research this topic. So our presenters today are myself, John Van Winkle, Engineering Manager, City of Tucson Floodplain Administration. We also have Joseph from Pima County Regional Flood Control. The City of Tucson will be presenting for the town of Sahuarita as the third presenter today. We also have John Spiker from the town of Oro Valley Stormwater Utility Division. We may have Dustin with the town of Marana. He might join in a little bit. And then last but not least, we'll have James and Aaron from the Arizona Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions. So Tucson's going to begin the presentation and a little description about Tucson and the surrounding areas. Tucson is a unique area. We have two rainy seasons generally. The first we're most familiar with are the monsoon seasons. That's when we receive the bulk of our rain, about 8 inches of rain a year. We also have a fairly rainy winter, which we experienced last winter, the winter of 2023. Which brought a lot of beneficial rains to the areas. Specifically regarding monsoons, most of the more dramatic events that we see and that people experience here are monsoons. Those are generally very quick moving, rapidly developing type storms. They can get moisture from the Sea of Cortez. They can get moisture from the Pacific Ocean. There's various ways that those storms can and form. And we're actually about to enter monsoon season here officially next week. So it's good that we're presenting here today, and hopefully we can take advantage of this monsoon season. So this is a flood insurance webinar, so it's important for people to know that they can get flood insurance even if their property is not in the flood zone. We'll explain and show different types of flood zone mapping, and the nuances between different types and how flood zones are determined. But it's just important to know that that option's available to people, and that we're here to help research and provide information on the topic. So what is flooding? So the formal definition of flooding is it's an excess of water on land that is normally dry, which affects 2 or more acres of land or 2 or more properties. That is a very, as the slide said, a very general description of flooding. The image in the background clearly is a storm that is impacting more than 2 acres of land and more than 2 properties. But in a sense, that's its basic definition. So the City of Tucson is an urbanized, developed area for the most part, and we experience flooding in different ways. So monsoon storms not only develop and form very quickly. If you watch the radar during monsoon season, which a lot of people on this presentation do, for lack of other things to do, you can see how these storms develop, their patterns, how quickly they can move across Tucson and the surrounding areas. And with them, they bring a lot of sudden rain, sudden wind. And so they move through the system fairly quickly. And because Tucson is generally urbanized and we have a lot of impervious area, flooding also develops very quickly. So these flood zones can rise and fall just basically as quickly as the storms move through. And so it's a very kind of unique thing for anybody who's been through a monsoon season in the Tucson area. So this is a picture from 2006. It's an example of what the Rito River looks like at or near flood stage. It's just important to note that these dry wash systems that we experience throughout the year, which are mostly never have water in them, can rise and fall very suddenly as these storm systems move through. So that's an important aspect of the conversation today. So the city of Tucson participates in the NFIP program, which is FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, National Flood Insurance Program. And the way that we participate in that is not only through using FEMA regulatory maps, but we also are part of the community rating system, or CRS. And CRS is a way that the city gains credit or points for activities related to floodplain activities. And so, for instance, this webinar, presenting information to people, providing guidance and information, is part of a CRS activity. And through the city of Tucson's active management practices for floodplain, our mapping, our outreach, and the physical infrastructure that we build and maintain in coordination with our partners, we obtain credit from FEMA through the NFIP program. And that credit allows for lower cost insurance, and it provides other benefits to the community as well, to know that the city and other jurisdictions are participating in this program. So the NFIP was passed way back in time, but it's been reformed over a period of time, and Pima County will discuss the more recent updates to the program. But generally, we are trying to find ways to better assess and manage risk associated with flooding. And part of that management associated with flooding is through flood insurance and flood insurance premiums and the activities that the city takes to maintain its CRS rating. So where are you? So we'll discuss now jurisdictional and FEMA floodplain mapping. And I hope people take away from this that it's important, as the bottom right in the slide indicates, it's important to contact your local officials and engineering reviewers and city staff. That's why we're here. This is what we do. The information presented following this slide, there's a lot of different types of flood zones. There's a lot of different mapping. There's lots of different sources of information. But the best source available to you is personnel such as myself or other presenters here today, or city municipal staff that are available to discuss. So there are, in general, two types of regulatory flood areas within the city and within other jurisdictions. We have floodplains that are established by FEMA, and then we also have floodplains that we call local regulatory floodplains, which are floodplains that are established by the city of Tucson or by Pima County or by Oro Valley in coordination with one another. These flood zones mean different things as far as the depth of water, how much water is moving through the system, and so forth. So it's important to know where you are and to understand the risks associated with those flood hazard areas. There are different types of flood zones. There's low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And these are all determined based on flow and depth and the size of the storm event. As I explained kind of at the introduction to this batch of slides here, there are lots of different definitions of these zones, and we're not going to go into specifically what they mean. But if you get a chance to actually open up the flood zone mapping and see it, you'll see lots of different ways and how the information is presented in labeling and nomenclature. So this is an example of different types of flood zones. And to the average user, they probably don't mean a whole lot, but from a flood insurance perspective, from a development perspective, each one of these categories carries different considerations that have to be taken into account. So an example of a flood zone where the city has, in partner with with regional partners, has established is a area off of Grant Road that's protected by a levee. And so in this picture, you see there's actually two different types of flood zones. There's a zone X, and then there's also a zone AE. And the zone AE is the regulatory floodplain for most structures. The zone X is not considered regulatory for non-critical facilities. So this is an example of kind of a nuance in code in how structures are afforded protection and the types of risk that we're trying to manage. So here's another further example. So the blue flood zone in the middle is an example of a 100-year floodplain in the Santa Cruz River. The gray area is an example of a 500-year or a much lower probability type event flood zone. This is an example of City of Tucson regulatory flood zones. So we color them a little differently, we identify them a little differently, but we need to understand that there are regulatory flood zones. There's not just FEMA flood zones. Oftentimes local municipalities and jurisdictions will have a better understanding of where these local areas are. And so it's important that when any research is being conducted on a property, that a discussion about local regulatory flood zones is included. Here's an example. Picture on the left is just a radar snapshot of a monsoon system, probably heading north up the Oro Valley for John to deal with, or maybe south. I don't know. It depends on the wind direction. But you can see, and if you'd experience these, how quickly they move through town. And so these flood zones develop very quickly and generally dissipate very quickly. And so that all factors in how flood zones are determined and how they're mapped. Here's another example of the Rito River back in 2006. So a normally dry wash, you could probably go down there today and walk your dog, would otherwise be completely full. So what is the city of Tucson doing? What are the surrounding communities doing to manage these risks, to encourage people to research and provide information on properties, and make sure that, for instance, new construction and infrastructure is built to handle these areas. So the city of Tucson has several things that they're doing. We have a very active floodplain ordinance. We have a stormwater management program. We have several building codes and standards, and they're all geared towards making sure that new or existing infrastructure and buildings are afforded the best possible level of protection. And that all ties back into the city's CRS rating and our continuing activities to make sure that we're managing these risks and providing information to people. So this is an example, City of Tucson Floodplain Management Plan. If you could take a snapshot of this, The link to the latest version of the plan is below. It's kind of a bit of a read, but it provides a lot of really good information about mapping and activities and plans that the city and its other partners have to manage and mitigate flooding. So what else are we doing? So we engage in capital improvement projects and smaller projects as we can. An example of projects that are improving flooding condition are an example of Downtown Links project, which is nearing completion. The Broadway Road realignment / widening included some pretty substantial drainage infrastructure. We also do smaller scale neighborhood improvements, smaller basins that are really designed to kind of mitigate smaller scale issues. But we're very active in mitigating and building infrastructure, and more importantly, maintaining existing infrastructure to help lower risk. So what can you do as an individual property owner? So first one, of course, is be prepared, right? But what does that generally mean? So, for most properties, making sure that water actually flows away. So making sure that any scuppers or outlets or the grade around your house is such that when it does rain, water generally will move away from the property. You can make sure that different types of mechanical equipment are elevated properly, that systems are cleared out, cleaned, and in good maintaining order. You can also reach out to the city or the jurisdiction that you live in, and can provide a lot of good information about your property and things you can do. So here's an example of a bank protected infrastructure. So something that individual community member can do is research about their property. And that's what we're here to help with. So we can look at properties with you, identify the parcel. We can explain what types of flood protection are there, what's been built, what's been done, and then also any issues associated with a potential property. You can do this all through City of Tucson staff. There's two different departments here at the city that coordinate with one another. We have floodplain and engineering staff in the Department of Transportation. We also have floodplain engineering staff in our Planning and Development Services department. But in either case, we're all here to help answer questions and provide information. So you can either go online or call. We have a new online permitting system where information can be formally requested. I'll show that here in another slide. So if you are working with an insurance agent and you want to know officially from the City of Tucson Floodplain Administrator's Office if your property is or is not in a regulatory flood zone, FEMA or local, we have something called a flood zone status request form. And those are requested through our what we call Tucson Development Center online. And it's a link here. This screenshot basically shows you all you need to know. There's a web link down at the bottom. There's an apply, and then there's a flood zone status request. And you fill that out, you send it in, city staff reviews it, and then we send out a letter to you with an official determination. If you're going a little further and want to know if your structure is actually properly elevated or what the elevation of your structure is, and you need what's referred to as an elevation certificate, we also issue those. And so it's the same exact process. You go to Tucson Development Center online and request an elevation certificate. We provide the necessary regulatory information that is then you would need to take to a registered land surveyor, who then goes around and surveys your property and determines the elevations. Those elevations are then compared against the regulatory flood elevations, and that information is also used for insurance purposes. So part of that is also for new construction. We also require elevation certificates for any new construction in a regulatory flood zone. May or may not include flood vents in garages. May or may not require different types of means of elevating the structure and so forth. It's important to remember that walls and fences need permits. We always throw that slide in here. And that's kind of part of what can you do. So if you have a wall with openings or vents or anything like that, they're probably there for a reason. So it's making sure that those are free and clear can really go a long way in helping mitigate issues. As I said earlier, we'll kind of discuss a wide range of topics. One of them is a little more relevant after we had the Bighorn fire up in the Catalina Mountains. So the topic of flood zones related to burn areas was a big topic after that fire occurred. So in general, there's some kind of best practices that you can do. Basically, it involves keeping your yard free of debris, keeping vegetation either well maintained and watered or cut back. And then also down here is a handy link. You can sign up actually for alerts through Pima County. So why does fire cause more flooding? So in general, it basically makes the ground impervious. And so water that would fall, that would otherwise soak in the ground and have a chance to infiltrate, otherwise will just run straight off. And that builds up and then it carries away the debris associated with the fire. So we'll see after large fires in the Catalina Mountains, we'll see debris flows in the major washes and the Rito as an example that will have that burnt material in it. And so water that would fall that would otherwise soak in the ground. And there's like an echo. Anyway, somebody hit mute. Here's lots of good information. We're available by phone, we're available by email, we're available through our online permitting system. There's lots of good flood erosion information and also lots of good people to talk to. Here's some additional information. Again, there's a lot. And so kind of I said it at the beginning, if it seems overwhelming, the best thing to do is to reach out to individuals and we can clarify things and walk you through the information. So when in doubt, find another route. There's the famous police car stuck in the sand. And then with that, thank you. And our next presenter is going to be Joe Kafari with the Pima County.
All right, John, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. And, you know, water doesn't just stay on lines and on property. So it's good to have this regional cooperation and have all the entities come to the table here. So really appreciate this collaboration. All right, I'm trying to load up my presentation here. Come on. All right, can you guys see that all right? All right, I'm getting a thumbs up. All right, so my name is Joseph Kafari. I am a program manager with the Pima County Regional Flood Control District, and I am our flood insurance expert on staff. And so today I'm going to be talking to you guys about Risk Rating 2.0 and what goes into flood insurance. All right, so Risk Rating 2.0 is called Equity in Action, and this means that property owners will no longer pay their fair share in premiums based on the value of their home. So FEMA's whole goal of the risk rating is to make it more equitable for people when it comes to flood insurance. So the people who own a mansion, you know, pay a different rate than those who own a manufactured home. All right, so when did this go into effect? It went into effect October 1st, 2021, and that was for all new policyholders. And that accounted for about 230,000 policies nationwide. But we are now past the April 1st, 2022 deadline when everybody is now subject to this new pricing methodology. So you all may be aware of what's called the legacy rating system. That's essentially risk rating 1, but that has now gone away and the entire nation is now on risk rating 2.0. So what's the deal with this risk rating? So through the new pricing methodology, FEMA is better able to inform individuals about their unique flood risks. So this was designed to individualize the flood insurance policies and not do a broad swath, a broad generalization of what a flood policy would cost. It's looking at the property, and we'll get into that. So where were we as a nation in flood insurance before this changeover? Well, there were about 5 million policies in force, accounting for $1.3 trillion in coverage. John just mentioned or was talking about the community rating system. A majority of us flood control jurisdictions across the nation are part of that, 75%. And that has a direct benefit to the constituents living within those communities, and that's through those discounts. So what has now changed under that risk rating 2.0 system? Well, this was designed to help flood insurance agents quote the process. And it's really looking at, it's showing the total premium price of what goes into those quotes more readily. Agents are able to generate these quotes in about 5 minutes, down from about 20 minutes under that legacy system. So simplified the quote process. A huge change is eliminating the mandatory elevation certificate requirement. So previously, a homeowner would have to submit an L-cert showing what their finished floor is, relating that to natural grade. But now FEMA uses a software program called CoreLogic, which can determine that for you. So it eliminated that elevation certificate requirement, saves the homeowner some money. It expanded the CRS discount to all floodplains. This is a huge, huge change. So John was talking about those CRS discounts. Well, if you're a Pima County resident, you get 35%. City of Tucson, you get 20%. Marana, you get 15%. And that's a direct savings to your flood insurance premium. This is now uniformly applied all across the community. Not to go into depth, but under the old system, if you were in a FEMA zone, you would get that bigger discount. If you were in an X zone or outside of a FEMA floodplain, you would get a straight 10% discount. So it really opened it up for more people to get that flood insurance. Another big change is basing off the premiums on the replacement cost value of a structure rather than the full cash value. So a full cash value, the full cash value would look at 100% total loss of a structure. So, you know, a $300,000 house, your flood insurance would look at the $300,000 catastrophic event. It's now looking at that replacement cost. Hey, really, you know, only a third of the house could get damaged, you know, during a flood. So let's look at, you know, just that replacement cost. That's really what the flood insurance is going to be paying against. So this gets into the equity. It considers the loss difference between the higher valued and lower value homes. Replacing some CMU piers on a manufactured home is going to cost a lot different than it would if you had to replace the drywall and the stucco and the tiling and the granite, you know, on those bigger valued homes. So looking more at that equity. What's not changing? All of the surcharges, of course, right? FEMA, Congress, everyone's going to be getting their money one way or another. So those surcharges are still in place. Discounts are not changing. They're actually expanding, which is great. You are able to transfer discounts to new property owners. And then on a floodplain management side, the use of the flood insurance rate maps are still going to be in place for that mandatory purchase. You know, if you have a mortgage in that FEMA special flood hazard area, it's still going to be required that you get that. There's a couple of phased out things, which, you know, grandfathered rates, those preferred risk policies, that legacy, everything is now switched over because it's past that April 1st changeover. So let's look at some of the variables that go into actually pricing the quote. The rating variables are the flood type. Are you impacted by a stream, river, or ocean, right? So we're looking at those coastal communities, or is it more related to a raining source? Is it just coming at that one instant during a rainstorm? The distance to the flooding source is the main driving point of your flood insurance premium. This is what has the biggest cost factor. So the closer you are to that flooding source, the more expensive your premium is going to be, right? Because you have a higher chance of being impacted. The further away, the lesser cost it's going to be. And then, of course, how high do you sit above that flooding source? The higher elevated your finished floor is, or your finished floor, above that flooding source, the lower your cost is going to be, and vice versa. Looking at the building variables, these are more secondary, but still have effect. That replacement cost value that we discussed. And then the construction type, are you built out of wood? Are you built out of masonry? A lot of homes are steel, have kind of steel beams. So looking at that construction type. Your foundation is important, which we'll get into. How many floors on the structure, right? If you're a 2-story house and the first floor gets damaged, well, there's going to be some damage to that second floor as well. So your building is being taken into account. Essentially what we just talked about in the previous slide, the elevation of the structure relative to the flooding source is that driving factor. What's cool about this local relative elevation essentially is they're taking the center point of your structure, they're going out 500 meters squared and taking an average land slope of that area. So if that center point sits higher than the average, great. Theoretically, you're protected from that flood because water's sloping away. But if you sit in that, if you're below that average, you're a bathtub, right? All the water is draining to you. So that local relative elevation is going to be a key driving factor as well. You can see some of those characteristics of the first floor height down there. Really what we're seeing in Arizona is that top left, that slab on grade. And then to an extent, we're seeing that top right, that elevated on post pile and pier. And that's if you're a manufactured home. Those other ones are really more applicable to the coastal regions, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, California. So we're really looking at those top two. And again, just reiterating that, the distance to the flooding source. We, as floodplain managers, had some questions. What does that mean? What is the flooding source? So FEMA uses what's called the National Hydrography Dataset version 2+. I guess they weren't happy with version 2. They had to make it extra. And I'll show you an example of what that is. We get a lot of questions from engineers, and I know we have a couple on the presentation here. So a LOMR or LOMA, letter of map revision or letter of map amendment, that doesn't necessarily have a bearing on the flood insurance pricing. FEMA's response to that is the risk is still there at the 101-year flood event. So if you get yourself out of that 100-year storm, you're still going to be impacted by that 101-year storm potentially or greater. So it's designed to take into account the potential for the future greater floods within that area. But what a LOMR or a LOMA does do is get that homeowner out of that mandatory purchase requirement. So it still may be worth for a property owner, if their quote is saying they have to pay, $4,000, they could potentially hire an engineer to prove that they're outside of that 100-year and get rid of that mandatory requirement. Some other generalities we're seeing, it costs for every $1,000 of coverage, there's about a $15 cost on the premium. The maximum amounts that you can obtain are $250,000 in building coverage and $100,000 in contents coverage. This was just some of the questions that we had, the distance to the flooding source, we got that answered. There's also a surcharge, the reserve fund assessment. And this is essentially an 18% surcharge extra that FEMA collects, and it goes into a bank account essentially. And that's what they use for paying out catastrophic claims. So think Hurricane Ian, think something the level of Hurricane Katrina, where they have to pay out those catastrophic claims. what Arizonans and a lot of inland states don't like is that our money is now being used to pay for those coastal communities where it's more prevalent. This is something that FEMA's looking at, whether they amend the reserve fund assessment. But, you know, big government, it's going to take some time. This is an example of that national hydrography data set. So that right image with all those blue lines, that's what FEMA is basing. That's what FEMA is basing the distance to the flooding source. That left-hand picture is a zoomed in area. If you're familiar with Pima County, that's kind of the Rito, Santa Cruz, and Cañada del Oro confluence area. So if you own a house in that area, you can kind of see what that distance to the flooding sources looks like.
Yep.
When this first came about, Pima County worked with some insurance agents to generate some quotes because it really is a black box when it comes to floodplain managers. We can't see as much as a insurance agent can, but floodplain managers, we're the ones who have to respond to this. So this is a property that's in violation with Pima County flood control. It was built without permits, a whole bunch of stuff. There's a basement in a floodplain. But you can see that it's about $3,000 worth of coverage. You know, so not too bad. You know, we expected a higher rate, but then we ran the second quote. This is a quote that's in the city of Tucson. It's right next to the Rito River, bank protected. They're not in a floodplain per se. They're in the 500-year floodplain. It's a non-regulatory area. And so we thought, great, under the legacy system, these guys are paying about $400. But under this risk rating system, they're paying $4,897. That is a 100% increase, right? 10% increase, something like that. I can't do math. That's why I talk floodplains. But this is the insurance agent. This is his house. He was taken aback by this. You know, a 10x jump is huge. And what we came to find out is that distance to the flooding source, he's being looked at as having beachfront property, right? He's right next to the Rito River. That's a huge area. But he sits, you know, essentially level with the surrounding areas. That's a huge increase. So this is what this got floodplain managers really talking across the nation, is situations like this. Again, I talked about this was designed to help the insurance agents. Floodplain managers were not taken into account with this. And as the rest of the nation is seeing these increases, it's pricing out a lot of new property buyers. You know, you can't afford to pay $4,800 if it's mandatory, you know, in certain situations. So as of last week, you know, Louisiana, Texas, a couple other communities are actually suing the federal government over this risk rating because of these large increases and FEMA's unwillingness essentially to modify what goes into that quote. So, you know, next year when we present this, we might have some updated information of what goes into that. But wanted to talk to you guys a bit about the private flood insurance side. As these FEMA NFIP policies are jumping up in price, this has left the opportunity for those private flood insurers to come in and essentially set up a market, right? So over 250 companies as of 2022, they are pricing theirs more like that legacy system. So it's looking at those FEMA flood zone datas. If you have 3 feet of water in AO3 zone running through your property, you know, that's going to be priced a lot higher than an AO1 zone where there's only 1 foot. So it's more of that legacy-like. This is all this is all voluntarily submitted data because this is a private flood insurance, but you can see down in the bottom left there, 400,000 policies in 2020, risk rating comes in 21, and now we're up about 150,000 policies. And that's just those companies who report that. That's huge. You can see those red circles there. This was at a recent flood insurance conference I went to, pricing out some policies here. And the NFIP under that legacy system, $650. And then under risk rating 2.0, $6,200, right? Another 10x increase. That is huge. But under that private flood insurance, one company is willing to offer them $1,400, for that property. That's huge. We're seeing a huge decline across the nation of those NFIP policies. And we're assuming, because it's not publicly available, we're assuming a lot of people are going to that private flood insurance side. That leads into, what if you have to get that mandatory flood insurance pricing? Well, mortgage lenders, about 90% of the mortgage lenders across the nation are now accepting those private flood insurance policies. This is a dramatic change in the real estate industry. Historically, you had to get that NFIP or that FEMA policy for a federally backed mortgage. Not anymore. A lot more companies are now open to that private flood insurance. So a very unique and interesting trend. There are definitely pros and cons on the private flood insurance side, but again, we're seeing a lot more people drop their NFIP policies and going towards it. I was at a flood insurance conference, like I said, March 27th, so fairly recently, and some risk rating updates. FEMA has 2 years later finally acknowledged that the system is not perfect. So what they're saying now is it's not just a manual update, it's a whole new product. So think Microsoft, think Apple, they come out with different versions of their operating software, weekly, monthly, yearly. So they want to try to do the same thing with risk rating 2.0 and calibrate those quotes as we go through the process here. That third bullet point, producing a quote is very easy for the flood insurance agent, but they're not floodplain managers. So how do they communicate that change in price? When you see a 10x jump like that, they're not equipped to answer those questions. And really, as flood control managers, Pima County, City of Tucson, we're not able to answer a lot of that stuff as well. We know what goes into it, but we can't see the data behind it. So another big thing is FEMA wants to open up what's called the declaration page. Instead of just showing a total price of what that flood insurance premium is going to be, show the data behind it. And that helps on the FEMA side. If you can justify that price, that's a lot easier to sell, right? It's just a little bit more transparency is going to go a long way. FEMA's also toying with the idea of what's called direct to consumer. So think of a mobile app version of risk rating 2.0, where you don't have to be a flood insurance agent to price yourself. Homes do not have a unique vehicle identification number. Each home is different, and it's going to change once additions come in or new HVAC systems, right? It's always changing. So to have a homeowner be able to go through, answer questions on their mobile app, and then get a price, that's going to be a lot easier than trying to sit down with an insurance agent annually and try to get a new quote. FEMA's also thinking, should they be the insurance agents, right? They're the ones who can look at that data. They can theoretically convey that information to a property owner of what goes into it. So maybe there's going to be some FEMA federal flood insurance agents. I don't know how that's going to hold with all the other insurance companies, but what are you going to do? A big key thing, that third bullet point from the bottom, it needs to address affordability and be easier to understand. We talked about equity in action. The bigger homes are going to be paying more flood insurance, and the manufactured homes are not going to be. We're seeing the exact opposite, right? The manufactured homes are in areas where they have to be closer to rivers. They're an underserved community. There's no mitigation measures in that area. So they're actually paying more than those mansions who sit in the foothills are. So it's an inverse. We like to joke in our office, it's inaction, just combine those two. I do have some hope that FEMA is going to be revising risk rating. Like I said, with those calibration types of things, they are a lot more willing to listen to floodplain managers than they were a year ago at this conference. And then this lawsuit of, states versus United States is going to be huge. It's going to be one to watch for. And I imagine it goes to the Supreme Court a couple of years from now for a determination. I kind of rushed through a bunch of that stuff. I wanted to give you guys just the topical high level overview. I'm happy to answer any any other questions that you guys have or get more in depth, and we'll leave some contact information for you guys to do that so you can contact us. But other than that, I will look to see if there's any questions related to my section. And I'm not seeing any. No questions. Cool, cool. All right, I will turn it over to the next J in line, and that's John Spiker with the town of Oro Valley.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. And thank you, everybody who's participating this afternoon. I am John Spiker, the Stormwater Utility Division Manager for the town of Oro Valley. Before I jump into my presentation here, something I didn't hear last time and might be an interesting topic to hit on. What does a 100-year storm actually mean? Most of the floodplains that we see around town, whether they're FEMA, local floodplains, or special studies, are geared toward the industry standard of a 100-year storm event. Well, again, what does that really mean? That really relates to the actual percent chance of any given storm event. So when we say 100-year storm, we're actually talking about a 1% storm chance. So any given storm has a 1% chance to rain to the level which we typically design to. And Mr. Van Winkle's presentation did touch on not every single drainage piece of infrastructure is designed to a 100-year event, but that is typically industry standard. So that does relate to a 1% storm chance. So that doesn't mean it's going to rain once in 100 years, you're going to see that rain event. Any given rain storm event has a 1% chance of hitting that level. So again, we're not going to be training you all to be hydrologists or drainage engineers, but I want to articulate that a bit. There's a perception around town as we talk about 100-year events. Oh yeah, we saw one in 2006. We won't see one until 2106, and that's just not the case. We could get back-to-back storms that are classified as 100-year events. So that really is important for the public to acknowledge. It's just a 1% chance. It's a probability-based storm event. So with that, we're going to jump into a brief presentation on what Oro Valley is offering up as far as being flood safe and flood aware, and we'll kind of keep on moving. So let's get ripping here. I've got three things I want to touch on here with you guys. Really the ordinance or the policies that dictate floodplain and erosion hazard management here in the town. That is our chapter 17 of the town ordinance. You can find that online at orovalleyaz.gov. Next, we're going to touch on floodplain mapping. And again, the town has an interactive floodplain map that is available to the public. And then lastly, we'll touch on some context here. So not too much to touch on with the ordinance. It's pretty straightforward. Again, you can look that code up if you're interested in reading that. It'll probably put you to sleep at night if you're so inclined. So we're going to jump right into the floodplain mapping. Here's a snapshot of our homepage here at the town. And what I want to turn your attention to is the search bar in the upper right. Search our website. If you just go in and type in floodplain, that will bring you to our floodplain information page, which is here. And on there, you'll see a flood inquiry map on kind of the second line there. So you'd hyperlink to that, and it will bring you right into the publicly available map. Mr. Van Winkle did touch on if you need an official floodplain designation for a mortgage lender or an insurer, you can request those online through our customer portal. There is a fee for that. We do have to have some staff overview that and provide a designation for you, but you can go and search out this publicly available map just to get a sense for where your property or potential property in Oro Valley, what the status is for floodplains. So once you get through that, this is what you'll be seeing, really a snapshot of the town. We've got parcels in here. We've got stream threads in here, and then we have the floodplains. So what you'd be able to do is zoom around. You can input your address up in the upper left if you're so inclined, or again, because it's interactive, you can just zoom in and out if you know what location you happen to be looking for. So we picked one here. This is the CDO High School on Calle Concordia and Oracle Road. You would click on that particular parcel and it would highlight it. There's little arrows to flip between the data sets here. And this one actually shows the floodplain. So we've put metadata back behind these layers to assist the public. When was it established? Who established it? What kind of floodplain type it is? And are there any special notes that go along for the ride for that? Again, this is a really powerful tool that the public can utilize on their own just to get a sense for what is happening in and around their properties or their potential properties. And again, as always, as Joe mentioned, as John mentioned before him, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ring us up and ask us. We are the floodplain managing experts here, so we would be able to offer you as much information as you might be looking for if we know it. I cannot guarantee you that we know every single floodplain that is trucking through the town, but we do know an awful lot, so please reach out to us. So lastly, here's just some contact information. The stormwater utility is a division of Public Works. So our town engineer happens to be the Public Works director. He's also our floodplain administrator. But really for any day-to-day questions, please, you can reach out to me. We've got some phone numbers and some email addresses here. But really the most important thing as we're approaching monsoon season here rapidly, it's really important that you know the floodplain status of your property and that you're doing a walk around. Are your drainage channels plugged? Are your wall vents plugged up? It would behoove you to clean those things out and make sure you're ready for the rain season that's upcoming here. And again, with that, I'm going to end my presentation, but please reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. This is Elizabeth Leibold at the City of Tucson. I'm going to be sharing my screen here. We're going to now go to, can you see my screen? It says, thank you, next presentation, Town of Sahuarita.
No, we
No, we
cannot
just
see
see you.
Elizabeth.
Oh, I've tried sharing it again. Hold on.
There we go. We see it, Elizabeth.
Okay. So this presentation is on behalf of the Town of Sahuarita. Nalo Valle is the interim director of Public Works, and he's had a conflicting meeting, so he was not able to present today, so I'm presenting his slides. Why is it not going? Oops, there it goes. So for the Town of Sahuarita, they have a Title 14 code that talks about floodplain and erosion hazard management, and all development and construction activities must adhere to the Town of Sahuarita codes. This photo is a preliminary shot of pre-construction on a drainage project. The Town of Sahuarita has a floodplain use permit application. There's a link at the sahuaritaaz.gov website, and you're going to be looking for the floodplain use permit application. This presentation should have a link for that underlined portion. It brings you straight to the application. Floodplain use permits are needed for development in Sahuarita's floodplain areas. And the Town of Sahuarita can be contacted either by going to the Public Works Department, and the address is presented here, or you can call 520-344-7100 and talk to the engineering staff at Town of Sahuarita to discuss any drainage or floodplain question. There's also an email address, pwpermits@swaritaaz.gov. And the photo below shows a completed bridge project over a portion of the Santa Cruz River in the Swarita area. Our next speaker is not Town of Oro Valley. We just heard from John Spiker. And so we're going to go to the next speaker, and that's Dustin Ward. Dustin, are you joining us today? Does anybody see if Dustin's joined the group?
He is not, Elizabeth.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and do his presentation for him. Dustin is the contact over at the Town of Marana. Excuse me. This slide shows the pre-1983 flood event. And here it is during the flood event, and you can see in the center there how the Santa Cruz River overbanked and went all over the place. Again, there's pre, post. So if you go to the Town of Marana's website, they have a maps page, and you can go through and see this particular map. It's got the 1983 flood in it, kind of like a toggle, so you can see how it changes. The Town of Marana has a three-tier approach for protecting the community from flooding. Protect, preserve floodways and natural drainage using regulatory tools and, of course, drainage infrastructure. In order to protect and preserve floodway natural drainage, there are regulations that prohibit development in floodways. Those are the higher risk centered portions of the major channels. New development adjacent to a floodway have regulations as well. Engineering analysis are required, and that's reviewed by the Town of Marana, and there's also setbacks that are required. Rezoning process may be required to remove floodway zoning. Excuse me. Natural drainage ways remain undisturbed or require engineering analysis if altered. The town approval is required before any grading permit. Engineering design and drainage reports must be submitted. The Town of Marana also limits obstructions to natural flood flow. This is one of their maps. You can see the Santa Cruz River runs right through the middle of Town of Marana. The Town of Marana is also impacted from flooding from the south from unincorporated county. It's also impacted by the Tortolita fan flows from the northwest side of the town. So for the regulatory tools, education and the ordinance are part of the tools used by the Town of Marana. There's a website that can be accessed. There's brochures available, and Pima County assists with monitoring water courses in the Town of Marana. And you can always call or walk in to speak with the floodplain manager. There's GIS flood maps also available. The Town of Marana has subdivision regulations as well as single family residence and elevation requirements. Floodplain use permits and finished construction elevation certificates are also required, especially for those in the special flood hazard areas of FEMA high risk zones. And this picture again shows the different washes impacting the town of Marana. The town of Marana boundary is in the black dashed line. And then the third approach for the town of Marana to help the community protect against flooding are structural tools. There's a system of levees, of flood levee walls that are used in conjunction next to the cap water channel, as well as to protect against the Tortolita fan flows from the northeast. And they have detention retention basin requirements, and there are channel and storm drain systems that are required for subdivision development. Marana's also uses letters of map revision and other FEMA submittal processes to process changes in floodplain status in compliance to their town code. In conclusion, these approaches protect the town of Marana's people and infrastructure, natural heritage, and provide a vision for future floodplain management. We can give contact information for Dustin in the chat. And you can post your questions if you have any in the question. Our last presentation is the Arizona Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions. James McGuffin and Aaron Klug are going to present, and I have their presentation, and I'll share with you in a moment here.
Elizabeth, yeah, there we go. Looks good.
Aaron, James?
Yeah, good afternoon. This is James McGuffin. I'm a little bit technically challenged here because I am watching the presentation, but there's about a little bit of a delay. So Elizabeth, if you can just advance the slides, then I will work through. So, all right. So thank you everybody for joining. My name is James McGuffin, and I am the PIO for the Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions. I am joined today by Aaron Klug. Aaron has over 30 years of experience with the former Department of Insurance and the current Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions, since we were consolidated. And our contact information is there on the title slide. So next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions. We refer to it as DIFI because it rolls off the tongue a little bit easier than our full name. DIFI is a state agency. We do really three main things at DIFI. We are a regulatory agency for the state's insurance. We are a regulatory agency for banking. And we also have a division that includes the Arizona Automobile Theft Authority. But today, of course, we're talking about floods, so that'll be insurance. And within the insurance division, we do a few kind of main things, which is license all of our insurance companies that do business in the state, along with the agents that sell those policies. We monitor the financial health of the insurers to ensure that they can pay the claims for policies that they have contracted for. And then we also review insurance contracts to make sure that they comply with Arizona law. And then finally, we have an entire unit that answers consumer questions and investigates complaints against insurance companies. Next slide. When it comes to flood insurance, DIFI, we kind of have a role in this, and then we kind of don't. It depends on who's selling the insurance policy. So DIFI does not regulate government insurance programs. So there's been some talk today about the National Flood Insurance Program, and that is a federal program, and it is regulated and administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. So we don't have anything to do with that specifically, but there are private flood insurance products that are sold in the state. And this is where I would invite Aaron to come on and talk specifically about those private flood insurance products.
Hi, good afternoon. Let me take it off speaker there. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I have the same technological challenges this afternoon, unfortunately. So, yeah, there are just a handful of insurance companies that are actually writing private flood insurance in Arizona now. There are, you know, as James indicated, there's a distinction between the National Flood Insurance Program insurance policies, which are written by insurance companies, and the claims are processed by insurance companies, but the coverage is backed by the federal government. The monies are actually backed by the federal government, and the coverages are dictated, and the terms of the coverage are dictated by the federal government. So those NFIP policies we don't regulate, but these private flood insurance policies we do. And there is kind of a growing availability of these private flood policies. As I said, there may be between 5 and 10 insurance companies that are actually writing these private policies. They are more or less like the NFIP coverage, in that you can buy a policy that is either just covering your home, or may cover both your home and your contents. But the pricing for these products is done very differently than the rating 2.0 that Joe was describing. The insurance companies get to determine how they want to price those policies. So, but the other thing that's very different is with the federal flood insurance program, if an insurance company is going to participate in that program, they have to write that policy no matter where you are, no matter what kind of flood risk you're in. The private flood insurance companies get to determine what level of risk they are comfortable assuming. And so what we understand most of them to be doing is they're looking at the folks who are in the lower risk areas. But they may be able to look at things that the federal flood rating system doesn't allow them to look at, like those mitigating circumstances. So, so it is very different. The department does regulate those private flood insurance plans, and I guess I will say that if somebody feels, even if they bought an NFIP policy, but they feel like the agent that sold it to them, who has to be a licensed insurance agent by the department, if you had a problem with the agent, if they stole your premium, for instance, that's a big one. Please do consider the Department of Insurance, DIFI, a resource for you in that instance. And then if you had any problems with the private flood insurance policy, you could still contact the department if you had any problems with those as well. So, James, was there anything else that you wanted me to comment on in regard to the private flood insurance?
No, I think that's it. Thank you, Erin.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go on to the next slide. So just a few things about floods and flood insurance. Floods are among the most widespread natural disaster in the U.S. When you think about natural disasters, you know, other types come into mind, like hurricanes and tornadoes and mudslides, and a lot of those have you know, are geographically situated in along the coastal areas, the Midwest for tornadoes, and generally California, Oregon, Washington for mudslides. But floods, when you think about floods, they really are impactful for practically every state, even states like Arizona that are not known for a high volume of rain. We certainly have floods here as well. So when we're talking about flooding, it's not just river or creek bed overflows. That's generally what we think about, I think, in Arizona, because that's a lot of what we see, where these dry river beds all of a sudden from rains take on a large volume of water. The banks can't contain it, and that's when it overflows. But there's other things too when it comes to flooding. As I mentioned, mudslides and the tidal inundation are also part of things that we would consider flooding. 25% of the National Flood Insurance Program claims are in non-flood zones, and the reason that's important is because we wouldn't want people to think that just because they're not in a flood zone that they would be safe from flooding. Every owner needs to look at, their homeowner needs to look at their specific situation and determine what their level of risk is. And so even if you're not in a flood zone, you need to kind of look at your neighborhood and maybe where you are geographically located to some of these dry riverbeds that may take on a lot of water. So again, a full quarter of those National Flood Insurance Program claims are not even in non-flood zones. So that should cause homeowners to pause and take a close look at their specific property. Another thing that we really want to make abundantly clear, make sure everybody understands, is that flood is not covered by homeowners or renters insurance. I think anybody who owns a home is very familiar with your policy, but understand that when you have floodwaters come through, that will not be part of the coverage. So there are certain types of what you probably are referred to as flooding, like if you have a water pipe in your attic break or in your wall break and your house gets inundated with water, your homeowner's insurance will cover that because that's internal to your house. You have a bathtub or a sink overflow, water goes everywhere, most likely you're going to be covered by homeowners or renters. But when you have a flood where water comes from the outside of your house and comes in at ground level, then that is where your home insurance is not going to cover that. And then there's been some discussion about wildfires and why that increases the opportunity for floods. The loss of vegetation allows that water to move quickly. It doesn't disperse it into different directions, and so that can cause a lot of erosion, which can cause problems with structures. And of course, the fact that the wildfire changes that soil to where it does not absorb moisture in the way that it once did. So that burn scar is present. Next slide. So if you are asking the question of why you should research flood insurance, one thing that we like to say is that every building is in a flood zone to varying degrees. So just because you may live on a bit of a ridge or you may be in a neighborhood, you feel like you're protected, you should keep in mind that given an adequate or more than adequate amount of rain in a short period of time and the inability of water to possibly leave your neighborhood, or depending on if you're located next to one of those riverbeds where all of a sudden water comes through, your house, where it may not be in a flood zone, but we want you to really consider the fact that water will find its way, given enough volume and enough time for it to sit and have to try and get out of a neighborhood or something. So there are some places that you can look to check your property, and riskfactor.com is one of those. I'm going to have a slide specific to that a little bit later on in this presentation. So also once again, the definition that we use for flood for this purpose, and flood insurance is water that enters your home from outside at the ground level is flood. And once again, it is not covered by standard homeowners insurance. So a flood insurance policy may cost less than homeowners insurance. It's depending on who's selling it and all of a lot of different factors. But you need to just remember that it is in addition to homeowners coverage. It does not take the place of homeowners coverage. So flood insurance, if you have it, would cover a certain amount of claim, but it would not cover some of the other things that your homeowners insurance does cover for you. And you can buy a flood insurance policy that covers your house, your structure, and another one to cover your belongings. One of the things that this is one of the differences in standard homeowners coverage. If you have a house now and you have homeowners coverage, you generally select, work with your agent to determine what amount your house is worth and what it would cost to replace it. And you have that type of coverage limit on your policy. And then also within that policy, you can determine how much you believe your contents, the belongings within your house are worth, and you can set that. And of course, you pay based on what those coverage limits are. With flood insurance, it's different. Flood insurance, there is a policy that will pay for at least partially your structure, depending again on the limits of that policy. And then you would buy a second one to cover the belongings from flood damage. So there would be two required. That is the same with renters. You may be familiar with renters insurance and how it does not cover the structure because the renter doesn't care. They don't own I wouldn't say they don't care, but they don't own the structure. So it's not their property that's at risk in that situation, but their belongings are. So renters often buy like a homeowner's policy that covers just their belongings, and they can do the same with flood insurance. So a renter can buy flood insurance that covers any damage or claims for the things that they own within that structure. And then also, you have to purchase flood insurance in advance of monsoon and fire season. There is some exceptions to this that are determined generally by the federal government. They are few and far between. They relate to things such as the occurrence of a wildfire. There might be something that the feds would come in and say and waive a waiting period for flood insurance. But this kind of makes sense when you think about it. If people could watch the weather and then immediately when they saw something coming at them that looked bad, they could run out and buy flood insurance. The problem is, of course, an insurer would be unlikely to sell it to them at that point because they could watch the weather as well. If they did sell it, then there would be a great amount of liability for these insurers as well if they sold a bunch of policies and then had a lot of claims that came in. So there's a 30-day waiting period. That really is important if you think that you're going to have a problem because of just where your house is normally, where it is located, or if there is a wildfire that, like say, upstream of you, where there could be some additional runoff and erosion and things like that impact you. So just keep in mind that if you're interested in flood insurance, you don't want to wait too long. You want to kind of get it sooner than later, and certainly within that 30-day waiting period. Next slide. And this graph that's up, it's a bar graph. It represents 45 years. It was provided to me by the National Flood Insurance Program and concerns the claims that they've had in Arizona over the last 45 years. It started in 1978. They're on the left-hand side and works all the way to 2023 year to date. So as you can see that with some of those bar graphs, we have certain years, not very many, fortunately. There was a lot of claims in Arizona, and those would represent either significant storms that came through or just a generally wet year. I don't have the details on that, but that's certainly what we could speculate. In Arizona, over the last 45 years, they've had 5,234 claims that have come to the NFIP, and they have paid out $59.6 million. And in Pima County specifically, 567 costing or paying out $7.56 million. So in the grand scheme of things, they aren't, exceptionally high numbers as far as the number of claims. But keep in mind, these are not all the people that were impacted by floods. These were the people who had flood insurance. So I think it should just show you that some years are greater risk than other years. And again, we just want to encourage people to really understand their property and make those informed decisions. Next slide. So if you were curious about buying flood insurance, you can research your property's flood risk at floodsmart.gov. And I would just like to mention that if you just type FloodSmart into your search bar, the first thing that comes up, at least it did for me, would be floodsmart.com. And that is a business that wants to sell you flood insurance. So that is not the government agency of NFIP. And you should make sure that you see the .gov extension at the end of the website to ensure that you're actually in the right place. And that, because there's a lot of good information at floodsmart.gov, and you'll be able to research things instead of just looking to buy insurance. You can also call your homeowner's insurance agent or the company. And if they are not an NFIP agent, you can kind of go back to floodsmart.gov at a /flood insurance provider, and they will list within your state who is actually selling NFIP policies, and you can pursue those policies from there, or at least pursue some answers to your questions. And next slide. And this, I just wanted to show you. This was, as I was kind of working within this presentation, I was reading about some of these things, and I thought I would research my own situation, because I live fairly close in Glendale, Arizona, to what is normally a dry riverbed, and it's represented here by the orange and teal lines. That riverbed stays dry, 98, 99% of the time, but every once in a while, when it rains heavily up north, it really gets rolling. And I was happy to see that my house is not in a flood zone. I didn't expect that it would be, since I've never had flood insurance. But there is a flood zone just in the upper left-hand corner of that screen. The solid teal area is an actual flood zone. And as you can see, there are no houses there. And I would expect that when it will be developed at some point along the way, the developer will do the things that it will take to keep it, to make it where it's not in a flood zone anymore. But this is the type of thing that you can research with very simply. When you go on to floodsmart.gov, you can, on the landing page, you go right down to maps, click on it, put in your address, and this is the type of thing that comes right up. So this is not complicated, really convenient, really easy, and you can see what's going on in your neighborhood or anywhere that you might own property. Next slide. So these, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. These are just some contact information for some of the agencies I believe already spoken to you, so you probably have this already. So let's, Elizabeth, just go on to the next slide, which is a little bit more of that. I'm not sure we've heard from Santa Cruz County, so if you have an interest in Santa Cruz County, just know that they have a flood control site as well. So they have information on their website. And go ahead to the next slide. Flood insurance risk. Again, so we've talked about the floodsmart.gov already, and then the risk factor. This is another interesting and easy to use website. It is riskfactor.com, and go to the next slide, I can show you that, or actually it's just the next click on that. It may have already shown up for you there, since it was a click for me, but it probably showed up on the PDF there. But that's my address, and this is what comes up when you go to riskfactor.com. It shows you a picture of your property. It shows you the satellite view of where your house is located in the neighborhood. But more importantly, at the bottom of that, and there's more information than just this. I just captured this screen print, but it shows that in blue that where my house is, it has a minimal flood factor. So it is showing a number 1, which I believe is probably about as good as it gets. And then you go over to the right, and the fire factor is actually higher than flood for my house. This is wildfire, so it's at a 5, which is listed as major, but I still think that that's moderate. And then the heat factor they show you, which is severe, and anybody who lives in Phoenix can attest to that. And then the last one is the wind factor, which is a minimal number 1 also. But it just kind of goes to show you that there's been a lot of work in updating and putting information into these websites. It's really easy to navigate. All you need is to go into these websites, put your address in, and you can get a lot of information there, which should help to inform you whether you need to pursue more conversation about flood insurance, or if you feel like, based on your history and what the websites are telling you, that things are pretty good for you. Maybe you don't need flood insurance. So just a well-informed consumer is certainly what we're after here. So I believe with that, we would stand for any questions.
Thanks, James. Thanks everybody for being here. That was a really good presentation. It looks like we're right on time. Lots of valuable information presented. This will be published on the City of Tucson's floodplain management page, so it's available for download and for review. Let's take a minute and see if there were any questions asked during the time. Looks like there was only 1 or 2. The first one was from Peggy Carson, and it was a question about. Question is, who manages catch basins put in as a result of road widening, such as the basin put in at the Bonanza Wash when Tanca Verde was widened? And I see Elizabeth provided a response there. So Peggy, it depends. We'd have to look at it. It sounds like it's a public road that was made. So if it's a publicly maintained road and the catch basin's located in the right-of-way, then the City of Tucson would be responsible for maintaining it. It's possible that the catch basin is in private property or in a subdivision. So if you could provide us, as Elizabeth asked, your email address and some more property information, maybe the address of the issue or something that we can better locate, we can take a look at it, determine if it's ours. If it is, we can enter it in as a maintenance request item for our streets crews to go out and inspect. Thank you for writing back a response on that there, Elizabeth. Let's see. And the last question was from Anonymous. How soon will you post online, the presentation online? And so, Mike, how long? I guess it seems like our presentation is posted the following day.
Yeah, so good question. We have the previous presentation that is already posted. Erica, who works in the communications office, she will return to the office on Monday, and this live event for today will be posted on Monday.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I don't see, let me just scroll down here and make sure I'm not missing anything. Contact information for Miranda was provided, an email down at the bottom. I believe that's it. Does any of the presenters have anything else to say? Thanks for being here, staying a little late today, but it was all very valuable information. We appreciate everybody's time. So Elizabeth, Joe, James, Aaron, anything you'd like to add before we close it out?
I just wanted to thank the state again for assisting us with our outreach project today. They really do a good job at summarizing the key points. I kind of think that if we were to shorten the presentation, we just use a couple of slides from James' presentation, call it good. But yeah, the city of Tucson and town of Marana, town of Oro Valley, and town of Sahuarita, we appreciate the state's assistance and as well as the county flood control. And we have these flood insurance meetings annually. Our next upcoming presentation is a workshop, stormwater workshop, that's for water quality. And we also have the floodplain management plan annual meeting, and that's July 11th. More information is provided at the City of Tucson Floodplain Administration website. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. We'll leave it at that unless Joe or anybody at the state has anything to say.
All good. Thank you, guys. Elizabeth summed it up perfectly.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody, and I hope everybody has a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, James. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks, James.